Hello everyone, welcome back to our second lecture, Fundamentals of Public Policy and Analysis. In the last class, we discussed about the public policy, the definition and nature of public policy, along with the basic concepts of public policy. So today we'll be discussing the scope of public policy, and mainly in the scope we'll be discussing 5 different types of concepts that delineates the very scope of public policy. The first one is policy demand, policy decision, policy statement, policy outputs and policy outcomes. So let's understand one by one what are these concepts and how they do delineate the very scope of public policy. So the first concept is policy demand. So what exactly is the policy demand? As I told you in the previous class, policy demands are the claims, or this is a kind of request, pressure by the definite groups or sections of the society. So these policy demands are the demands or claims made upon the public officials by other actors in the political system for any kind of expected action or even inaction on some perceived problem. So when you think about this policy demand, such demands may take in the form of insistence that the government ought to do something to a particular proposal for specific action to a particular matter. So that defines what is policy demand when there is a situation. These needs are in form of demands or requests or claims by a definite sections. And coming to the second aspect of the scope of public policy, that is policy decisions. So once there would be claims, there would be requests, there would be policy demand, then as a result, the policy decisions will be followed from these policy demands. So these policy demands are the policy decisions are nothing but the result of the policy demands. So they are reflected in decisions and they are made by public officials, and these public officials authorize or give directions and content to the policy actions. So for example, we can take the case of decisions to enact statutes, issuing statutes. The other aspect that also form the scope of public policy is policy statements. So once we understood what is policy demand, then from policy demand we discuss about the policy decisions, how decisions are taken into account based on the policy demand. So now we need to understand what is policy statements. So we can take the definition given by J. Anderson. So policy statements are nothing but formal expressions or formal articulation of the policy decisions. So when you say that the decisions are expressed formally or articulated in the formal sphere, so these formal aspects of the policy decisions may include in terms of legislative statute. They may be in form of decrees or orders, administrative rules, or sometimes we can take the example of court opinions. And all these policy statements indicate the intention and the goal of the government and how to achieve those goals as well. And if you see the policy statements, then sometimes we find that policy statements are very ambiguous. And sometimes we find, since they are ambiguous, they can also reflect the characteristics of conflicting aspects. So they are sometimes conflicting in the sense that different and contradictory policies statement may be issued by different levels of branches or different units of the government or different agencies of the government in order to fix a matter of concern. So that is the reason many times we are finding that policy statements are ambiguous and conflicting as well. So coming to the last portion of the scope of the policy, so that is the policy output. I have already discussed about what exactly are the policy output, but just to define that policy outputs, we can again take the concept as defined by J. Anderson. So policy outputs are the manifestation which are tangible in nature in terms of policies, and these manifestations actually done in pursuance of the policy decisions and policy statements. So that is the reason, since it is tangible manifestation of policy, it can easily be enumerated and quantified. So because of this very nature of tangible or easy in quantification, so we can find that this policy output therefore may mean that what government does as distinguished from what it says or what it will do. So examples we can take that health centers, right? So health centers, how many health centers actually built? So they are the policy output. How many kilometers of national highways that were constructed, and how many schools were built, or how many industries were built. So all these are the examples of a policy output, because it is the tangible manifestations of several policies, and it is and all these are easily quantified. And in this case, it can be noted that the policy output sometimes may differ from what policy statements, that can be because of the gap in the policy statement and the policy output. And lastly, we also need to think about the policy outcomes that also forms the part of your scope of public policy. So policy outcomes are the last consequences of the policies, public policies. So these are the consequences meant for the entire society, and sometimes these consequences are intended, and sometimes these consequences may be unintended. So largely we can say, when we find some kind of policy outcomes, they are generally targeted, planned and intended. But however, simultaneously, while implementing the policy, the outcomes may sometimes found as unintended, unperceived, or not even targeted. So these both the intended and unintended policy outcomes are result from the actions or inactions from the government policy. They are the action, they are the result from the action or inaction by the respective government. So you can follow for this the first lecture, and up to this you can follow the book J.E. Anderson, Public Policy Making, an Introduction by Sengis. And the second book that you can also follow, these are textbooks, Understanding Public Policy by Thomas R. Dye book. So after understanding scope of public policy, now we need to understand what are the significance of public policy, why at all we need to have public policy. Or in this context, basically we need to understand two specific questions, that why do we need public policy. So that will be again explaining that the significance of public policy. And the second question is, why is government intervention needed at all. So in order to understand this particular discussion, significance of public policy, and we are taking these questions to explain the significance of public policy, let's discuss from the first question, that why do we need public policy, what is the reason. So we need public policy because there are some issues or concerns, or we can say when there are policy demands, then of course we are needing public policy. But again, there would be a question that why at all will be needing public policy, or why there will be the policy demand. So in order to understand that what can be the factors, or what can be the reasons for getting policy demand, and as a result the public policy is required, we need to understand two aspects, the behavioral aspects. Which behavior? The first one is understanding individual behavior, and the second one is to understand the group behavior. And in understanding the individual behavior and group behavior, so we can also find some limitations. Since there are some limitations in understanding the individual behavior and the group behavior as well, so that is the reason we need public policy, because by understanding these limitations in individual behavior and the group behavior, we find that there are issues, and hence policy demand is pronounced. So coming to the first one, that is understanding individual behavior, basically we will be discussing about the rational being. So in understanding the individual behavior, the first limitation is the rational behavior or rational being, and the second one in understanding the group behavior is collective actions. So now come to the first one, that what exactly is understanding individual behavior as rational being, and how they can how it is because of these limitations in understanding the individual behavior, it may lead to the necessity for the public policy. In order to understand this individual behavior as a rational being, so we can take some examples to understand. So first of all, let's understand what is rational behavior and rational being. So it is assumed that all the human beings are behaving rationally, so they try to maximize their utility. And when they try to maximize their utility, right, for their own interest, for their self-interest. So they behave rationally, and that is the reason it is assumed that human beings in economic activities behave rationally, and that is the reason it is known as the rational behavior or rational being. Human beings are rational beings. And since I told you that because of this understanding the individual behavior, we can find some of the issues and the policy demand is required. So we can take a couple of examples. So for example, we can think about the discriminations against girls. So what is the reason behind this discriminations against girls? So you can find some statistics. Let's say we can check the sex ratio. So for example, many states in India, just like you can find out some, if you see the statistics on sex ratio for Haryana and Punjab, then we can find that girls population is really low in comparison to the boy childbirth. So that means here we can say that we cannot assume that it is a natural factor that the girls' birth rate is lower than the boys' birth rate, but it is because of some discrimination as well, discrimination that is practiced in our society, or we can say it is because of the individual behavior that creates these discriminations against girls or against females. And many times we are finding that raising girl child is really expensive because of some traditions, some factors. So we are finding that when you think about girls, we need to spend a lot. That is what is being perceived. So for example, we have a tradition in many parts of India, that is dowry. And although it is illegal, but still this practice is very much prevalent. So these are called, you can say in pseudo, these are the gifts, but yes, these are the dowry. And since because of this dowry practice, the girls during the marriage, the girl's father has to provide some gifts in terms of dowry. And since this dowry is very expensive, and also the second factor could be that since the girls after marriage, they usually go to the boy's house, and as a result, girls family, they can find less benefits from raising a girl child. Okay, so that could be the reasons for more preference for boys in comparison to girls. Okay, and the second example that I can also give is missing women from the workforce. Okay, so what is this missing women from the workforce? Let's say we can speak about that in the workforce, women are not found. So that means their percentage in the working population has been decreased. And why it is so? Again, we are trying to find out why less number of women are participating in the workforce. So this could be, we can find many reasons, and the primary reasons could be because of the unpaid domestic and care work. That who is going to do the domestic work, like unpaid domestic work like cooking and cleaning and other stuffs, and care work like your child care or sick family members care, or old age persons in the family, and how they can be taken care of. So they are usually taken care of by females. So that is the reason it has been found that there has been missing component of women from the workforce. And if you see these two examples, then we can find that why the first one is happening, that there is discrimination against girls. So that is the reason abortion rate is high, and people's preference are generally for boys. And then we are finding that it is not a single individual's preference, rather these are the preference of the society, or societal preferences are reflected in terms of discrimination, and that is perhaps the reason we have this discriminated sex ratio as well. And while taking a decision that whether to have a boy or girl, and if there is by chance you get to know that a female is there in the woman's womb, then it is very likely to get it aborted. So this is a behavior, and those who are doing this, those individuals who are doing this, so they are thinking that they are acting as rational being, because for raising girls it is taking too much of time and too much of cost as well. So it is becoming too expensive in raising the girl child to be adult, and also they are not expecting very good amount of long term benefits in comparison to the boys, because boys would be the financial support and the physical support in the during the old age of the parents, but the girls, since they have to go to the boys family, so that is the reason the girls family may not be very interested to raise girls and allow girls to be in their family. So that is the reason the abortion rate is also high, and because of the interference of the technological innovations as well. So all these things are happening. So now when we are finding this particular behavior, that is individual behavior, and here by taking this decision, the individual thinks that he or she is behaving rationally. Okay, the same thing is missing women from the workforce, that who is going to do the domestic work and the care work if ladies or women are going outside for formal work or informal work, which is based on wage or salary. So this, and in this case, if you understand that why at all we need public policy or why at all government intervention is needed, so I think we need to understand the individual behavior and also the group behavior. Okay, so we are discussing about the individual behavior, and these are just some of the examples. We can think about so many other examples as well that defines that individual takes actions because it thinks that he or she is doing the rational decisions, and that is the reason he or she is treated as the rational being. So in this case, don't you think that the government intervention is needed? Government intervention is required in these cases, because sometimes we feel that all these are the policy demand, and sometimes we feel that if at all these are not the policy demand made upon or claimed upon some sections of the society, but government as the welfare state also needs to take or intervene in these issues in the presence of all these matter of concerns. So that is the reason the government intervention is required. And as a result, let's say that in order to deal with these two issues that I discussed, discrimination against girls in terms of falling sex ratio, girls ratio is per thousand is really low in comparison to boys. And the second issue that I discussed about that how individual takes actions and rationally behave, and that is the reason we are finding another problem of missing women from our workforce. So here in both the cases we feel that government intervention is needed. So as a result, the government must interfere in order to have a solution. So what can be the solution? Let's say solutions would be in terms of the policies again. Then we can think about in these cases, that is missing women from the workforce, or we can think about the unpaid domestic and care work. For these two, we need to find out what are the time span, what amount of hours are being spent for unpaid domestic and care work. Okay, and based on this understanding, then perhaps the government would be taking actions in terms of national policies. And if we see couple of years before, the government has already taken a survey that is known as the time use survey. So how the time is used by the females and males in households. So that forms the time use surveys, and based on this analysis of time use survey, the government is taking steps that how this particular case of missing women from the workforce can be solved. The second thing that also can be thought about, and the government is also taking steps or intervening in the problems that we have discussed here, that is by investment in water infrastructures, electricity infrastructures, and also investment in developmental policies like your health policies and childcare policies. We can think that this particular problem can be resolved, or this problem can be minimized to a larger degree. The third aspect that the government is also taking care by intervening is creating awareness of shared responsibility, and it has also created policy like paid paternal leave. So all of us are aware about maternity leave during the childbirth, right? The mother who is working here, she can claim up to 180 days of leave for taking care of her baby. But simultaneously, in order to share the responsibility as well, there is a provision of paternity leave, right? And this is the policy that the government intervened, that how the shared responsibility can be ensured. So enforcement of this particular policy is really a challenge, but yes, the government incentivized in terms of creating the paid paternal leave as well. So in both the things, while discussing about these two problems, we also understood that what is the role of the government, or how the government intervention is required, and what can be the steps that can be taken by the government itself in order to solve these problems. So since we are discussing about why there should be intervention by the government, or why do we need public policy. So in continuation to this, we can also think about so many other microeconomic aspects where individual behavior is prioritized, and we can find so many examples that how decisions are governed by the concept of a rational behavior, or behaving rationally, and that is the reason we are finding that government intervention is a must and public policy is required. We can find the policy demands because of these situations that guides individual behavior to behave rationally. And apart from these two examples, that is the example of being rational, and that is the reason we are finding some limitations, and because of this, the public policy is a must, or government intervention is a must to sort it out. In the similar line, we can also discuss about some other aspects in understanding the individual behavior. So for example, that while understanding the individual behavior, if you think about just microeconomic perspective, then we can find that many microeconomic theories are based on models and assumptions just to understand the individual behavior. So for example, we are discussing about the gender discriminations, right? And in this case, we are finding that through this process of selective abortion, right, this discrimination is much more visible. And the model suggests there could be certain factors which is creating this gender discriminations. And what are the factors that we can find? So we have to take into account the model, okay, and based on this model, we are using some data set, and by using this data set, we can identify what are the factors that can be attributed for this gender discrimination, and why at all we are finding some states are having really very discriminated sex ratios. So the factors that we found by just plugging in the data into the models, we can find the dowry, patrilocal practice, and some other factors that can create a preference for boys, and that is the reason we are finding some rational behavior for individuals to prefer boys over girls. So not only this, but some other factors that we can take note of, like maximization of utility. So here also we can think about that in this example of our discrimination, that why boys are getting preference over girls. So it is because of maximization of utility. So the individuals are thinking like this, that if there would be a boy, then of course the utility would be high for that particular family in comparison to the girls, because when the boy will grow up, the boy will be supporting the family, and also, and that is the reason investment on boys is really important. But if the family is investing anything on girls, then it would be a kind of debit, because whatever the returns that would be reaped on this investment, it will be again be provided to the boy's family after marriage. So that is the reason the individuals are calculating it, right, and they are trying to find that on which investment, on which particular decision there would be maximization of utility. So again we are finding that because the individual behavior is governed by the maximization of utility concept, that is the reason a situation is created, and where the government intervention is a must, we are finding the need for the public policies. So another example that we can take into account, that why we need to understand individual behavior for any good public policy making as well. So that is opportunity cost. So what is this opportunity cost? So in the case of this opportunity cost, it is defined as the next best alternative, that is furgon. So what is this next best alternative, that is furgon? Suppose say because of the traffic congestions you are stuck, right, and the traffic time is around 30 minutes. So that means you are stuck for 30 minutes. Then what is the cost of this traffic congestion? The cost of the traffic congestion is not only 30 minutes, right, but you can think about that during this 30 minutes, what else you could have done if you are at your office or at your home, right? So instead of driving in this particular busy road, you could have utilized that. Then what is the cost? Cost of being stuck in a traffic. So that is that must be understood in terms of the opportunity cost, that what amount of benefits that you could have reaped if you are at home right now during this 30 minutes. And the other factors that we can also discuss about incentives. The incentives is also another factor that can also impact the individual behavior. So for example, we can think about the higher education. Okay, so when we are finding the case of dropouts, so dropouts means after just the school education we are finding dropouts. So many are not interested to go for higher education. Okay, and again this is a problem when education, the degree of education would be high, then of course the well-being would be more. This is the understanding. We are going to create capitals, that is human capitals, through this process. But when we are finding that the dropouts rates are really high, and so in this case the government intervention is needed, right, or some kind of public policy is required. So this public policy can be understood in terms of incentives, that is for higher education, if there would be more real wage rate for women, then of course we will be finding that the women would also be incentivized to pursue their higher education degrees. So this is how we can think about that, how through the policies the individual behavior gets changed. If you are following a particular individual behavior, that how public policy can intervene and you can again change your behavior for a better one. So I'm stopping here. In the next class we'll be discussing about some of the other aspects under this individual behavior, that what are the limitations of the individual behavior. So that creates the necessity for the public policy or government intervention or public policy intervention is a must in those situations. Thank you.